Hello? Netflix? Sure, I can make a crayon burrito for you. I better get started. To make a crayon burrito, I'm going to need molds of the elements of a burrito. I started with a tortilla. I'm using fast-setting silicone to make the molds. I mixed parts A and B 1:1 and poured it over the real tortilla. As I was filming the behind the scenes, I was also filming elements for the burrito video for Netflix. Once the silicone set, I peeled it off the wax paper. It was quite hard to remove the tortilla from the mold, and I ended up having to soak it in water to get it all off. Then I moved on to the next element of the burrito: cheese. I laid some shredded cheese on a piece of wax paper. I positioned it in a way that it would look good later when it was layered inside of the burrito crayon. To mold the cheese, I would need a mold box to hold the silicone in. I made one out of some foam board I had laying around. I measured the basic dimensions of the cheese and then cut and scored the board to make a box. I taped the sides together and then placed the box over the cheese. To make sure the silicone doesn't ooze out under the box, I used hot glue to seal the edges. Then I mixed and poured the silicone over the cheese. Once the silicone set, I pulled the mold box off and peeled the silicone out of it. I didn't think through how I would get all of the cheese out of this mold. I tried to just pull it out with my fingers, but it didn't work super well. I ended up having to cut away parts of the mold to get the tiny strands of cheese out. Then I started with the lettuce. Because the cheese separated too much in the mold and was hard to remove, I decided to hot glue the lettuce to the wax paper. I added more layers of glue to keep all of the pieces of the lettuce together while trying to keep any glue from being visible. To save on silicone, I decided to put the tomatoes in the same mold as the lettuce. I cut one up, dried it off, then I hot glued it to the wax paper as well. I sealed the mold box with hot glue and then poured in the silicone. This time, when the silicone set, it was slightly easier to remove the lettuce, but I still had to work for a while to get all of the tiny pieces out. And now on to the refried beans. It was pretty weird having to push beans onto the wax paper. I tried to smooth it out in the way you might see if you opened a burrito. When the silicone set, I demolded the box, and it was much easier to get the beans out of the mold than the other food. But still a little nasty. Finally, I moved on to the ground beef. I used the hot glue method again to try to keep all of the particles together. Some of the meat did come out easily, but I still had to go through and pick out a ton of tiny little chunks that got trapped in the silicone. It was almost like a really gross picky pad. After all of the prep work was done, I was finally able to start the real process of making the crayon burrito. First, I melted white crayons to make the tortilla. I used my phone to film and move it around for each shot to try to keep it interesting. I love to use a lot of close-ups in my videos because I think I can make something that would otherwise be dull more visually interesting. One of the difficult aspects of making realistic things with melted crayons is that I need to be pretty precise when matching the colors of the specific parts of the item. In this case, I need the tortilla to be whitish, but that requires white, yellow, and brown crayons to achieve. I use a little hot glue melting plate to melt my crayons in, and it was not quite big enough to melt enough wax to fill the whole mold, so I had to do multiple pours to fill it up. To make the different pours of wax blend together, I used a heat tool to melt the tops. Between each color, I had to clean out the melting pot so that it wouldn't contaminate the next color. Here I'm starting to mix a light brown for the refried bean color. You can see how I'm filming the close-up of the crayon beginning to melt. It has to be brown, but also with a hint of orange. I ended up needing to add more white as well because the real refried beans were quite light. Once the color was mixed, I poured it into a paper cup because it is easier to be precise when pouring into the mold. I moved the camera position to get a better shot of the wax going into the mold. When I'm filming videos, I'm constantly moving the camera around to get a cool shot. I shook the wax around to let it cool a little before pouring it because I found that it comes out of the mold easier if it's not super heated when I pour it. Now the tortilla has finally cooled enough to take it out of the mold. I had to be very careful not to break the tortilla since it's actually a very thin crayon. I had added a little bit of soft pastel to the mold in the areas that would be brown spots on the real tortilla, so it looked surprisingly realistic after I peeled off the mold. Time to start mixing up the meat color. Ground beef has an almost gray-brown color, so I had to mix black and white and brown together to get the right color. As usual, I poured it into the paper cup and then into the silicone mold. I know it's getting a little repetitive at this point, but here I am working on the lettuce color. As usual, to get the right color, I had to mix multiple colors of green, white, yellow, and even brown. I did do something different with the lettuce, which is that I added some beeswax to the crayon to give it more translucency. I wasn't really sure if the mold for the lettuce would actually look realistic once I pulled the wax out, but I didn't really have time to worry about logistics since I had a deadline to meet with the burrito making, so I forged ahead. I moved on to the tomato color. I forgot to get a shot of it, but I added a little beeswax to the red as well because tomatoes have some translucency too. Again, I poured the wax into the mold, and I was finally able to move on to the last color, orange for the cheese. I mixed yellow and some assorted colors of orange and red to get the perfect hue. Once the cheese was mixed and poured, it was time to start demolding the other foods I had already done. The ground beef broke a little while I was trying to get it out, but beef is usually in little chunks, so it wasn't a problem. Luckily, I was able to get the refried beans out in one piece. You can see how sometimes I have to do things multiple times for the camera to get the timing right for the final video shot. Then I demolded the cheese, tomatoes, and lettuce. I was quite happy with how each food looked. I did think I could make them look even more realistic by adding more color variation with soft pastels. It's fairly subtle, but it helps make everything not look as fake. I made sure to get some good close-ups of the process for my final video that I needed to deliver. And now I started the assembly of the burrito. Since I molded the tortilla flat, I figured I would put it all together flat and then attempt to heat and roll the tortilla later. Little did I know that would become a bigger issue, but I'll get to that. I placed each type of food on the tortilla, piling it up like a real burrito. And here is the final open burrito. I thought it turned out quite well, but now it's time for the hard part, rolling the burrito. Because I was so nervous about rolling, I decided to film a sneaky shot of rolling the burrito with a real tortilla, just in case I wouldn't be able to get what I wanted later. Luckily, the crayon tortilla was so realistic, I didn't think it's obvious that I switched the two for one shot. Here you can see me starting the scary process of trying to bend the tortilla crayon. I put it back in its mold to help hold the shape and used a heat tool to soften it up. Sadly, when I tried to bend it, the whole thing started to crumble apart. I figured the only thing I could do would be to remold it, but add some beeswax to the crayon because that helps make it less brittle. I used a rolled up silicone mat to bend the crayon over. Luckily this time, as I started to bend the crayon, it didn't crack and I was able to get it to fold all the way over the form. Once I got the first side, I peeled back the mold and started bending the other side. When it was fully bent, I peeled off the rest of the mold and let it cool. Now I had a rolled tortilla crayon. I had to be very careful with the tortilla because it could easily break at any moment. I removed the silicone tube and filled it with the other crayon food items. And there you go, the final crayon burrito. It turned out even better than I expected. I filmed the reveal for my video, and then I needed to use the crayon pieces to write the title of the movie. At first I was unsure what part of the burrito I would use to write the text, so I tried a few different options. Then I settled on using the refried beans for the title. My handwriting happens to be horrendous, so I started writing the words and then switched to another paper where I traced the title so that it could more closely mimic the font of the film. Then I used the lettuce to write the words "Only On." I cleaned it up a little bit with an X-Acto knife. Finally, I used the tomato to write Netflix. Again, I traced the Netflix font with a light box to make sure it actually looked like the real thing. It was supposed to be handmade looking, but not too wonky. Here I am setting up the final shot, which was a time-lapse of the burrito melting. This shot ended up being used as the hook for the final video. And here it is, the final Burrito Crayon video. Well, I hope you liked seeing a little bit into the process of me making this burrito crayon. This is all that's left after it got melted. Let me know in the comments if there's anything else you want to see me make, and I'll leave you with a close-up of the melting burrito and an option to subscribe or to watch another video. Thank you. Bye.